In cinema, longships are often portrayed as symbols of power, dragon-headed prows cutting through waves, warriors with axes ready for battle. Hollywood glorifies Viking raids, battles, and the era's grandeur, but often neglects the grim reality of what transpired in these ships' holds. There, in the darkness below deck, unfolded the tragedy of enslaved women, sold like cattle and used as tools. In truth, the Viking economy was largely built on the exploitation of human beings, and for these unfortunate women, the nightmare was just beginning. Imagine the year 845. Danish ships arrive in Cork, their crews forcibly dragging 112 women aboard, Irish nuns, peasant women, wives, and daughters of merchants. They disappear into foul-smelling holds, devoid of windows or light, marked only by rope burns and the pervasive stench of fear. These are not prisoners of war, but cargo, living goods destined for sale in the slave market. At dawn, the slave market opens in Dublin. Buyers, like fastidious cattle dealers, examine the women's teeth, check their hands for calluses, and assess their hips to determine childbearing potential. A young Irish woman might fetch 8 silver marks, the equivalent of 2 first-rate swords. An older woman might sell for 4 marks, and children for half that amount. Coins jingle, chains clank, and another soul changes hands. But before reaching the auction block, these women were broken by the sea voyage. A 73-day journey from Waterford to Constantinople, spent in holds with ceilings just 90 centimeters, about 35 inches, high, offered no privacy, no dignity. During storms, the holds would fill with salt water, and the unfortunate bodies would be flung against the wooden walls. Ibn Fadlan, observing Vikings on the Volga, noted that women arriving at port barely resembled human beings. They were treated not as valuable cargo, but as disposable material. If a woman died in the hold, she was simply thrown overboard. If she refused to eat, she was beaten until she complied. Pregnancy during the voyage was even seen as an additional profit. The Vikings cynically calculated every aspect of human suffering. Consider Ingvar's expedition in 1036. 30 ships departed from Sweden towards the Caspian Sea, carrying 800 enslaved women. Only 400 of them survived the 4-month journey along Russian rivers. Dysentery, starvation, and violence caused the deaths of the others, whose bodies became food for fish. Ingvar's crew felt no remorse, as demand in the Baghdad market remained high. The Islamic world paid a high price for women from Northern Europe, especially for fair-haired, pale-skinned, and blue-eyed women who were valued above all others. A single Slavic woman could fetch a purebred horse in Cordoba, while an Irish redhead in Cairo could command up to 20 gold dinars. Beauty became currency, youth a source of profit, and suffering a lucrative business. Constantinople's slave market spanned 12 city blocks. Buyers arrived from across the Mediterranean, bartering for human flesh as if for grain futures. The Vikings supplied the goods, Christian women from Ireland, Scotland, and England, as well as Slavic women from Poland, Bohemia, and Rus. All roads led to the auction block, and all chains ended in slavery. But the horror didn't end when the ships sailed. These women became concubines, domestic servants, and field laborers. They bore children who would never know freedom and died in foreign lands, speaking foreign tongues. Their bones rest in unmarked graves from Spain to Syria. The Viking trade network spread human suffering across 2 continents. The numbers speak for themselves. According to Dublin records, 12,000 enslaved people were sold between 940 and 980. Hedeby sold 8,000 during the same period, and York another 6,000. This was not merely opportunistic raiding and prisoner capture, but human trafficking on an industrial scale. The Vikings built their empire on the backs of enslaved people. Ship manifests from Bergen still exist, listing cargo like shopping lists: 42 Irish women aged 16 to 30, 18 Scottish girls aged 12 to 20, and 6 pregnant women due in spring. They were treated as livestock, valued as commodities, and transported like sacks of grain. The journey south followed established routes. Ships sailed along the coast of Frisia, then overland to rivers flowing into the Black Sea, where they were handed over to Byzantine merchants. Women changed hands up to 6 times before reaching their final buyers. Each transfer meant new chains, new holds, and new horrors. Medieval chronicles describe the inspection process, where women were stripped naked. Buyers checked for diseases, disabilities, and signs of previous childbirth. A scar reduced value, gray hair meant a discount, and dental problems could halve the price. Human dignity was weighed and priced. Consider the burial site in Repton, where archaeologists discovered 250 Viking warriors interred with honors. Nearby, the remains of enslaved women were found, devoid of grave goods or ceremonies, their bones simply cast into a pit. Even in death, the hierarchy persisted. Even buried, they remained someone's property. Viking legal codes clearly stated that enslaved women had no rights. Masters could beat them, sell them, and kill them with impunity. They could not own property, enter contracts, or testify in court. They existed outside human society, mere breathing tools. Not all, however, submitted to the fate of slavery. The Annals of Ulster recount a rebellion in Dublin in 957 when 30 enslaved women, seizing a moment during transport, overcame their guards. Seizing a ship, they desperately tried to return home to Ireland. But their hopes were dashed. The Vikings tracked the escapees within a week, and a brutal reprisal followed. All 30 women were publicly executed in Dublin's market, serving as a warning to others. Some enslaved women attempted escape during overland transfers, risking their lives in the vast Russian forests and turbulent German rivers. Unfortunately, most were caught within days. As punishment for seeking freedom, they were branded on the forehead with a hot iron. This scar permanently marked them as escape risks, halving their market value. The most tragic fate awaited the most valuable enslaved women, the beautiful and young. A fate worse than arduous field labor awaited them. They became concubines in Muslim harems, deprived of freedom and unable to leave their quarters. Though their lives might have been lived in luxury, they remained captives, property, enslaved in golden chains. DNA evidence from medieval cemeteries confirms this sad history. Irish genetic markers are found in burials from Russes to Spain, and Scottish chromosomes in Byzantine cemeteries. These women traveled the world like cargo, dying far from home in unmarked graves. The economic impact of the slave trade permeated all Viking settlements. Profits from selling people financed ship construction, weapon acquisition, and the organization of new raids. Silver flowed like a river into Scandinavia from the slave markets. Without this brutal business, Viking expansion would have been impossible. Their entire system thrived on the suffering of enslaved people. Even language reflected this reality. Old Norse developed numerous words for various categories of enslaved people, such as thrall for common slaves, ambat for domestic female servants, and lacing for freed individuals. This rich vocabulary associated with human property testifies to its widespread prevalence in the Viking world. The Christian Church also did not remain aloof from this profitable trade. Monasteries acquired enslaved women for labor, and abbots paid market prices for human toil. Even holy fathers participated in human trafficking, and this moral contradiction seemed not to trouble the medieval conscience. Archaeological excavations in Dublin reveal the scale of this trade. Fragments of slave collars, chain links, and iron shackles designed for women, all testifying to the existence of an extensive slave trade network. These artifacts are buried beneath modern streets, and every new construction project yields more evidence of this grim business. Trade routes extended wherever Viking ships reached. Irish women are found in burials in Iceland, and Scottish enslaved women in settlements in Greenland. Human cargo was transported as far as Viking ships could sail, spreading suffering across the North Atlantic. But the true horror lies in the details. Ship logs describe women giving birth in chains, infants coming into the world in the holds, children who never saw daylight during the voyage. The Vikings meticulously documented their cruelty. Taken, for example, the account of Huld the Red's journey in 1012. His ship transported 96 enslaved women from England to Novgorod. 17 of them died during the voyage. 3 gave birth, but only 1 child survived. The log recorded every death, every birth, every loss of inventory. In the eastern markets, buyers awaited them, wealthy merchants from Baghdad, Byzantine aristocrats, and Spanish grandees, ready to pay a high price for women from Northern Europe. Demand created supply, and the market created suffering. To survive, some women adapted to their new conditions, learning languages, adopting new faiths, abandoning their names. They changed themselves to survive, but never forgot the ships, the chains, and the moment they ceased to be people and became property. Archaeological findings reveal malnutrition in the graves of enslaved women, bone stress from arduous labor, healed fractures from beatings, and dental problems due to poor nutrition. Their skeletons tell stories of systematic violence and lives spent in bondage. Modern historians estimate the scale of this tragedy. Conservative estimates suggest about 50,000 women were enslaved during the Viking Age, while bolder estimates reach up to 200,000. The true figure will likely remain forever buried with the bones, lost with the ships, and forgotten with the names. Slave markets left few traces, wood rots, ropes disintegrate, and chains rust. But the human cost of this tragedy echoes in genetics, in archaeological findings, and in the scattered bones of forgotten women who died far from home. This sinister conveyor belt never stopped. Spring raids in Ireland, summer expeditions in Scotland, autumn raids in Slavic lands, and winter sales in southern markets. The calendar of suffering followed seasonal rhythms, predictable as the changing seasons. Viking crews honed their methods, conducting quiet night raids on monasteries and coordinated strikes on coastal villages. They knew when and where to attack to seize the most valuable targets. Young women were in high demand, virgins fetched higher prices, and pregnant women were sold 2 for the price of 1. Along the banks of the River Liffey in Dublin stretched notorious holding pens where hundreds of women awaited their fate, displayed for sale. These improvised prisons, enclosed by crude wooden palisades, were under the constant watch of guards armed with whips, ready to quell any sign of defiance. Daily, buyers, like those at a cattle market, assessed the goods, selecting future servants, concubines, or laborers. The turnover was relentless. New batches of captives arrived to replace those sold, and this ruthless business never knew a lull. Evidence of those terrible days survives in the form of graffiti scratched into Dublin's slave quarters. Names carved in stone or scratched on wood, like echoes from the past, called out for remembrance. Bridget from Clonmacnoise, "O daughter of Connor, remember us." These inscriptions were final acts of resistance, desperate attempts to leave a mark before vanishing forever into oblivion. The construction of ships from that era bore the imprint of this inhumane trade. Viking longships were adapted for transporting living cargo. Below deck, additional holds were created, where captives were kept in cramped, unsanitary conditions. Primitive ventilation systems were meant to sustain their lives, at least during transport. Shackling rings were attached to the hull beams, a stark reminder that these vessels were floating prisons. The Vikings, renowned for their seafaring skills, adapted their ships to maximize profit from human suffering. Weather conditions played a crucial role in this business. Storm seasons led to increased mortality among those transported, while calm seas allowed for longer voyages to distant markets. Spring thaws opened river routes into Russia, transforming rivers into arteries of slavery. Thus, nature itself shaped the calendar of the slave trade, dictating its rhythm and geography. Medical knowledge of the era served not compassion, but profit. Viking traders, interested in preserving the marketable appearance of captives, studied ways to treat dysentery, scurvy, and various infections. A dead enslaved person yielded no income, and a sick one sold at a significant discount. Maintaining the health of captives became, above all, a business strategy. Feeding schedules were developed with strict norms. Just enough food to prevent starvation, and just enough water to avoid dehydration. These calculations aim to maximize profit while minimizing operational costs. Every grain of barley and every drop of water was meticulously accounted for. In these inhumane conditions, women developed their own survival strategies, sharing food with the weak, caring for the sick, and forming alliances to protect against violence. Even in chains, they found a way to build a community of mutual aid, proving that humanity cannot be eradicated even by the cruelest methods. The processing of captives began immediately after their capture. Families were separated, languages mixed, and identities erased. The Vikings, as experienced human traffickers, understood the psychology of their victims. Isolated individuals submitted more easily than cohesive groups, and disorientation fostered compliance. Physical conditioning was part of the preparation for sale. Captives were forced to walk daily to maintain muscle tone, kept clean for buyers' inspection, and treated for obvious injuries to preserve their marketable value. These procedures, devoid of any human consideration, transformed people into livestock bound for auction. Training began even during transport. Captives were taught basic commands in Old Norse, simple tasks demonstrating obedience. Trained enslaved women were valued higher than uneducated captives, making training a profitable investment for traders. Auction protocols followed established customs, morning inspections, midday bidding, evening settlements. All were subject to strict market rules. Buyers received guarantees against hidden defects and, in case of faulty goods, could return the merchandise. Contract law governed the sale of people, just like any other commercial activity. Some buyers specialized in certain types of enslaved women: young women for harems, strong women for field labor, educated women for household management, and beautiful women for entertainment. The market segmented people like ordinary commodities, adjusting to supply and demand. Payment methods varied by region: silver in Scandinavia, gold in Byzantium, silk in Constantinople, and spices in Baghdad. The currency of suffering adapted to local preferences, demonstrating the cynical nature of this trade. Quality control measures were aimed at protecting buyers' interests. Medical examinations, age verification, and skill demonstrations were all part of the certification process for human commodities. The Vikings, concerned with their reputation, guaranteed the quality of enslaved women. Customer satisfaction stimulated repeat transactions, sustaining this inhumane business. Transport infrastructure played a key role in supporting the trade. Specialized ships, established routes, supply depots, and security networks all were part of the logistical system created by the Vikings to move human cargo across continents. A legal framework legitimized all aspects of the slave trade: documents of ownership, transfer, and tax assessments. Owning enslaved people became bureaucratized, and state seals made suffering official. Insurance policies protected traders from financial losses, compensating for the deaths of enslaved women during transport or covering damages for damaged goods. Risk management was applied even to human cargo, allowing Vikings to hedge their bets on human suffering. Seasonal fluctuations in supply and demand influenced pricing. In spring, when fieldwork began, demand for enslaved women increased, and in winter, when domestic servants were needed, their prices rose. Market forces determined human value based on the calendar date. Competition among traders stimulated innovation. Faster ships reduced mortality rates among those transported, and improved containment systems enhanced the condition of the goods. Competing traders contributed to technological progress, which in turn served to increase profits. Regional specialization developed over time. Dublin became a processing center for Irish captives, York for English enslaved people, and Hedeby specialized in Slavic captives. Geographical advantages created trade centers where flows of living commodities were concentrated. During the Viking Age, not only trade routes but also sinister trade centers flourished, where living commodities were the primary articles of exchange. The financing for these grim enterprises came from diverse sources. Wealthy jarls invested their capital in organizing raiding expeditions. Merchants, driven by greed, provided working capital for trade operations. Successful raids, yielding rich spoils, became the financial foundation for future ventures. The slave trade, like a snake biting its tail, generated its own funds for further expansion. Meticulous record-keeping allowed every transaction to be tracked, like a web entangling the entire system. Manifests, meticulously listing cargo details, became ominous catalogues of human souls. Accounting ledgers, like chroniclers, recorded sales data, reflecting the scale of the tragedy. Profit calculations, cold and impartial, guided business decisions, determining the fates of thousands of people. The Vikings, like soulless corporations, managed the human trade with astonishing precision. Quality categories, like brands, determined price levels, premium for the young and beautiful, standard for healthy adults, and discount for damaged goods. The market, like a cruel judge, stratified human value by price categories, transforming people into faceless commodities. Customer preferences, like a compass, shaped supply strategies, guiding Vikings in their search for the right commodity. Islamic buyers, who valued fair skin, preferred light-skinned women. Byzantine markets, known for their love of knowledge, favored educated slaves. Spanish aristocrats, seeking luxury and exoticism, looked for exotic northern beauties to adorn their homes. Demand patterns, like an invisible hand, directed the aims of raids, determining who should be abducted and sold. A reputation system, like a foundation, built trust among traders, strengthening their connections. Reliable suppliers, who had proven themselves, received preferential status, becoming privileged partners in this sinister business. Quality dealers, offering goods of the highest caliber, attracted premium buyers willing to pay a high price. Business relationships, like blood vessels, spanned continents and cultures, linking participants in this inhumane trade. Training programs, like sinister universities, prepared crews for human cargo operations, instructing them in vessel management, crowd control, and basic medical aid. Vikings, like pioneers of efficiency, professionalized the slave trade through education, transmitting knowledge and technology across regions. Eastern, shackle designs, southern preservation methods, northern navigation techniques, innovations born in different corners of the world, crossed cultural boundaries in the service of suffering. Market intelligence, like a spy network, guided operations, providing valuable information, reports from trading partners, price updates from distant ports, and demand forecasts for upcoming seasons. Information networks, like a nervous system, sustained the slave trade, ensuring its uninterrupted functioning. Logistics coordination, like a complex mechanism, demanded meticulous planning. Ship schedules, cargo distribution, route optimization, supply chain management, All were applied to human trafficking operations, transforming them into a well-oiled business. Financial instruments such as letters of credit, currency exchange, and insurance contracts facilitated long-distance trade, making it safer and more efficient. Medieval banking, like an impartial arbiter, served the slave trade alongside legitimate commerce, making no distinction between profit and morality. Quality assurance measures, like a shield, protected brand reputation, ensuring consistent evaluation standards, reliable delivery schedules, and customer service protocols. Vikings, like cold-blooded businessmen, treated the slave trade as a professional enterprise, striving for maximum profit at any cost. Methods of breaking, like diabolical rituals, followed documented patterns aimed at destroying identity and will. Old names were stripped away, new identities assigned, native languages forbidden, all with one goal: to break the spirit and transform a person into an obedient slave. Vikings, like seasoned psychologists, understood that cultural destruction created psychological subjugation. A woman who forgot her mother's lullabies ceased to fight for home, losing connection with her past and hope for the future. Torture, like a universal tool, served multiple purposes: to punish resistance, demonstrate power, and intimidate witnesses. These methods, though leaving few archaeological traces, exerted maximum psychological impact, turning fear into the most effective chain binding the will. Ship captains, like experienced overseers, developed expertise in managing human cargo, aiming for maximum efficiency and profit. Optimal loading density, feeding schedules preventing starvation without loss, ventilation systems sustaining the commodity's life, all were designed to keep as many people alive as possible and sell them at a higher price. Knowledge, like a cursed legacy, was passed down through generations of slave traders, poisoning their souls and strengthening their inhumane business. Some Vikings, like damned souls, specialized exclusively in the trade of flesh, turning human suffering into a source of income. Thorvald the Slaver, like a shark, sailed the seas with 12 ships from Dublin, hunting for new victims. Olaf the Merchant, like a spider, managed supply routes to Constantinople, weaving his sinister web. Eric Redhand, like a jailer, oversaw holding facilities in York, turning them into hell on earth. Professional human traffickers, like builders of an evil empire, built business empires on the bones and tears of their victims. Seasonal cycles, like a sinister calendar, dictated everything, determining the time and place for new raids. Spring raids, like a hunt for the innocent, targeted monastic schools when young women gathered for education. Summer expeditions, like a storm, descended upon coastal farms during harvest festivals when people were most vulnerable. In autumn, raids were conducted on Slavic territories before winter isolation, when hope of rescue faded. The calendar of suffering, like an ominous ritual, followed predictable patterns, turning life into a nightmare. Buyer preferences, like a compass, varied depending on the destination, determining who should be abducted and where to sell them. Baghdad merchants, valuing beauty and grace, desired fair-haired Scandinavian women for elite harems. Byzantine aristocrats, seeking education and refinement, preferred educated Irish women for household management. Spanish grandees, craving luxury and exoticism, sought exotic northern beauties to display their wealth and status. Regional tastes, like an invisible hand, shaped raid strategies, determining the fates of thousands. Ship manifests, like ominous ledgers, read as inventory lists, reducing people to faceless commodities. Hold number 1, 23 Irish women, ages 14 to 26. Hold number 2, 31 English women, various conditions. Hold number 3, 18 pregnant women, delivery dates unknown. People reduced to cargo documentation, stripped of name and individuality. Medical experiments, like diabolical research, served to maximize profit, turning human suffering into a source of knowledge. How little food prevents death by starvation? What herbs treat dysentery without expensive medicines? What torture methods leave no visible scars? Vikings, like mad scientists, conducted research into human suffering, striving for new ways to increase profit. Escape attempts, like rays of hope, followed predictable patterns but rarely succeeded. Most occurred in the first week of captivity, when hope of rescue still lingered. River crossings offered the best opportunities, but the risk of capture was high. Forested areas provided cover, but the recapture rate exceeded 90%, nullifying all efforts. Punishment protocols, like sinister rules, ensured that few tried twice, suppressing the will to resist. DNA analysis of medieval burials, like an echo from the past, reveals the scale of the tragedy. Irish genetic markers appear in graves from Iceland to Baghdad, testifying to the widespread nature of slavery. Scottish chromosomes are found in Russian cemeteries, confirming connections between different regions. English lineages are traced to Spanish burial sites, painting a picture of a global tragedy. Genetic evidence, like a map, charts the diaspora of suffering, reminding us of history's dark pages. Slave traders meticulously mapped the geography of suffering, creating a chart of terror that permeated medieval Europe. Sophisticated psychological manipulations were honed over time. Victims were offered deceptive hope of potential liberation, skillfully creating competition among captives for the slightest signs of favor. Children were cynically used as leverage against mothers, transforming maternal love into a tool of control. These psychological tortures proved far more effective than physical shackles, enslaving mind and will. Pricing in this inhumane trade was marked by market sophistication. A captive's virginity increased her value by 50% above the base price. Language skills added 20%, and noble origin doubled the standard rate. Beauty bonuses varied, depending on regional preferences, demonstrating that even in the world of slavery, there were standards of attractiveness. Human value was reduced to market quotes, turning life into a commodity. Holding facilities for captives were strategically located along trade routes, like logistical centers of hell. Dublin's slave quarters housed up to 500 women during a peak demand periods. York's pens held approximately 300 captives simultaneously. Facilities in Bergen processed up to 200 units of merchandise monthly. The infrastructure was ruthlessly scaled to meet market needs. Guard training programs ensured security and control, crowd control methods for managing large groups, individual restraint techniques for especially valuable prisoners, and riot suppression tactics to prevent uprisings. Vikings transformed human trafficking into a highly professional industry, systematizing training and implementing strict quality control at every stage. Medical examinations before ship loading, condition assessment during transport, and final checks before sale. Maintaining standards throughout the supply chain was key to success. Customer service protocols, seemingly borrowed from the world of legitimate commerce, fostered buyer loyalty. Guarantees of satisfaction from a purchase, return policies for defective goods, and programs for replacing damaged items all demonstrated a cynical approach to human trafficking. The slave trade adopted modern business practices long before they became commonplace. Preserved financial records from major trading centers shed light on the scale of this industry. Dublin's customs logs attest to taxes collected from 12,000 slave transactions between 940 and 980 AD. York's port records document 8,000 sales during the same period. These figures speak to industrial-scale operations that turned human suffering into profit. International coordination required complex planning, scheduling vessels across multiple routes, distributing cargo among various markets, and currency exchange to facilitate cross-cultural transactions. Vikings skillfully managed global supply chains of human commodities, demonstrating remarkable organization and logistics. Technology transfer enhanced the efficiency of human trafficking. Eastern shackle designs reduced escape attempts, southern body preservation methods decreased mortality during transport, and northern navigation techniques expanded the operational range. Innovations served only one purpose: to increase suffering, recognizing no cultural boundaries. A legal framework legitimized this terrible business. Documents of property transfer, tax assessment records, certificates of ownership. Medieval bureaucracy normalized human trafficking through official papers. Insurance markets developed around the risks of the slave trade, offering policies covering losses from storms, revolts, and disease outbreaks. Vikings cold-bloodedly hedged financial bets on human suffering. Market intelligence networks provided competitive advantages. Price reports from distant ports, demand forecasts for upcoming seasons, and supply assessments from raided territories. Information flows supported strategic decision-making, allowing traders to stay a step ahead. Regional specialization increased efficiency. Dublin specialized in Irish captives, Hedeby in Slavic, and York predominantly in English slaves. Geographical advantages created centers of trading expertise, each honing its skills in processing a specific group of people. Funding mechanisms became increasingly sophisticated. Investor partnerships financed large expeditions, credit agreements supported seasonal operations, and profit-sharing arrangements incentivized crew performance. Medieval finance, therefore, served both legitimate commerce and human trafficking, demonstrating the close link between economics and morality. Training prepared future slave traders, transmitting knowledge and skills from generation to generation. Navigation instructions for ship captains, methods for handling live cargo for crew members, and market analysis for trade decisions. Vikings institutionalized the transfer of knowledge, ensuring continuity in this horrific business. Quality assurance programs maintained reputation with standardized evaluation systems, consistent supply schedules, and reliable customer service. Professional standards were applied even to human trafficking operations, demonstrating a cynical approach to this inhumane trade. Competition fostered continuous improvement. Faster ships reduced transport mortality, improved holding conditions, enhanced the cargo's state, and superior routes expanded market access. Competing traders, therefore, contributed to technological advancement in the name of suffering. Cultural influence extended far beyond economics. Icelandic sagas glorified successful slave raids, runic stones commemorated profitable expeditions, and art depicted enslaved women as symbols of wealth. Human trafficking became culturally normalized, permeating all aspects of society. Archaeological evidence, scattered across Europe, serves as silent witness to this era. Fragments of shackles and ship burials, links of chains and excavations of trading posts, remains of human bodies in slave quarter digs, the material culture of suffering left an indelible mark on history. The shadow of a culture of suffering deeply permeated the historical fabric. Genetic research sheds light on breeding programs, revealing horrifying details. Systematic acts of violence produced offspring of mixed heritage, condemning them to a life of bondage. Slaves born into slavery became property by right of inheritance, their fates determined by meticulously tracked bloodlines. The Viking Age marked the industrialization of human reproduction, turning people into commodities. Despite brutal repression, resistance networks formed. Secret communication channels ran between places of detention, transmitting vital information. News of paths to freedom was conveyed in the rhythms of songs, and plans for revolts were hidden in the symbolism of religious rituals. Even in the darkest times, hope continued to smolder. Modern forensic methods reveal traces of torture, uncovering horrifying details of the past. Bone fractures, evidence of systematic beatings, and dental damage caused by forced feeding tell their stories. Skeletal stress, the result of prolonged captivity, is imprinted in the bones as a silent scream. Archaeological findings document methodical cruelty, revealing the scale of the tragedy. Climatic conditions significantly influenced trade routes and patterns. Harsh winters hindered overland movement, while stormy seasons limited sea travel. Arid years expanded the boundaries of raids, pushing for the search of new victims. Natural conditions, thus, shaped human trafficking operations, determining their scale and geography. Documentary evidence, preserved in various languages, offers insight into this grim era. Latin chronicles describe the aftermath of devastating raids. Arabic reports detail market operations where people were bought and sold like cattle. Runic inscriptions praise successful expeditions, silencing the suffering they brought. Old Irish annals record the devastation of villages, reminding us of the price paid for greed. Medical knowledge was exploited for commercial purposes, transforming healthcare into a tool of exploitation. Herbal remedies were used to maintain the health of the cargo, ensuring its marketable appearance. Surgical methods were applied to treat injuries sustained during transport to preserve the value of the merchandise. Pregnancy management aimed to maximize potential profit, turning women into slave factories. Healthcare became inventory maintenance, where human life mattered only insofar as it generated income. Social hierarchies persisted even in captivity, reflecting societal biases and prejudices. Former nobility retained higher value, their past status influencing their price. Educated women commanded a premium, their knowledge and skills valued even in slavery. Beauty created privileged positions, offering hope for better treatment. Status thus survived slavery, manifesting in altered forms. Economic modeling allowed for the estimation of profits, correlating transport costs with selling prices, mortality rates with cargo density, and operational expenses with revenue generated. Vikings optimized human trafficking, striving for maximum return on their investments. International diplomacy was also involved in the slave trade, reflecting its prevalence and profitability. Treaty provisions covered rights to engage in human trafficking, embedding it within legal frameworks. Diplomatic immunity was granted to slave traders, protecting them from prosecution. Trade agreements included clauses on human cargo, recognizing it as an integral part of commercial relations. Governmental cooperation facilitated cross-border operations, allowing the slave trade to flourish. The legacy of this era continues to live on today, reminding us of the tragic events of the past. Genetic traces in modern populations attest to the mixing of peoples caused by the slave trade. Archaeological sites, scattered across several continents, serve as silent witnesses to the scale of this trade. Historical records, preserved in dozens of languages, recount the suffering and hardship endured by millions. The impact of this era resonates through the centuries, reminding us of the need to fight for justice and equality. In 1893, builders in Dublin uncovered a mass grave containing the remains of 423 women. The skeletons, dated to the late 10th century, the peak of the slave trade, bore traces of malnutrition and violence. In their hands, they clutched small crosses, still praying to gods who never answered their pleas for salvation. This discovery served as yet another reminder of the brutality and inhumanity of the slave trade, a tragedy that left an indelible mark on human history.